So the main world of Vicious Mockery all revolves around one of the largest kingdoms in my world, it's called Sectus. The kingdom is called the Kingdom of Sectus, and the country is called Sectus because it's kind of split into 4 sectors, if you will. But there's 5 major guilds, sorry. And the guilds sort of dictate all the happenings in the world. So when one country is trading whatever it may be, textiles or whatever they need, they're going through a guild because the guild is offering protection, they're offering boats, safe harbor. They won't even allow you to sell on guild territory if you are not guild sanctioned. So you have the foxes, which kind of own the banks, and they sort of have a lot of spying kind of going on, and they have the ear of the kingdoms. So when you have the money, you have the ear. You have the helm, which kind of do major construction, and then they also have a standing army that they loan to each of the kingdoms. So if the principality of the kingdom decides they want to go to war, they have to check with the helm. Do they want to? Does the helm want to fight the helm in another kingdom? So they sort of regulate war. You have the green, which is like the farmers' guild, but they are all the major agriculture. They also change the way because they have druids, they can change the way rivers flow, and they can change the topography of the land with a couple days' time. They can change miles and miles of land at their own whim. So if you want more acorns, well, you know what? We got to change this swampland to something more viable. They can do that, and sometimes they'll do the opposite. You have the Mages Guild, and so they dictate kind of all of the major arcane innovations, research, education. Major education happens through the Mages Guild. So even if you decide, oh man, I'm not arcane, I'm not magically inclined, but I want to learn more about history, you got to go through the Mages Guild. They dictate that. And then you have the Wheel, which are sort of the religious guild. And they don't like to be called a guild, but all the major religions kind of are all built into the Wheel. They also have their own standing army, and they're called the Paladins Alliance. And the Paladins are sort of the police force in all of the different areas. So you have a holy police force dictating laws. And let's say you get found that, you didn't do something right. Well, you're going to go to a group of guild leaders to get judged and sentenced. It's not through the king or queen. So the fun major aspects of my world of Dia is that the kingdoms themselves truly have no power. And I think our friends now know that. So we have 4 main characters in Vicious Mockery. We have Aoide, who is the Teifling Bard, and she is awesome. Comes to the group, contributes to the group through her membership in one of our guilds, and they're sort of mercantile guilds in a way. And she is a part of the guild that owns the banks, and essentially they own information too, knowledge. So they have spies in different parts of the world, and I can feed her little points of data that maybe other people don't know, because she does know this. But we're at the point we are in the story currently. She doesn't know very much. And then we have Delron, who is our human monk, coming from a monastery which is to the east of Sectus. He was sort of pushed off there from the orphanages in Sectus. Sectus is the main kingdom where our friends meet and thrive throughout like the first 2 chapters of Viscer's Mockery. And he does well in the monastery as far as combat training goes, but his discipline is lacking. So when he joins the Pickle Posse, which is the group Vicious Mockery kind of, it's their moniker that they took on, their team name, if you will. He is sort of early kicked out, just recently kicked out of the monastery due to violent tendencies. And he sort of gets kind of swept up into this world of politics and guilds. We have my friend Drew, who plays Aoidrin, the faithless or the hapless, who's a paladin, not by choice, sort of thrusted into it. He comes from a town called Grimwater, which our friends might know it because those episodes are coming out now. And Grimwater is a nice, horrible town to the south, very muggy and horrible, whereas he sort of lived a life of attempted leisure. Didn't quite work out that way when he was tasked to save the life of someone and couldn't, and subsequently saved his own. It was a total accident, so he sort of carries this guilt with him, and he ends up in Sectus due to just kind of being lost in the world and a little depressed. Andrew does a very good job of sort of doing the sad sack, the sad clown, because he's a really funny guy, but his backstory is kind of sad, and as our audience will see, he's not well received in Grimwater. And then finally, I have Althea, who Jordan plays, and Althea is a Eladrin Sorceress. She's an elven sorceress. Eladrin's sort of an offshoot of elf, and she comes from the elven kingdoms, which we haven't seen in the show yet, but the elven kingdoms are modeled after Aztecan and Mayan technologies, and they have a giant pyramid that sort of everybody lives on. And it's in the middle of the desert. And you're like, okay, fair-skinned elves, how are they making it possible? Magic. And so she comes from a heavily magic-infused area. And she kind of lived with her parents are owners of a textile sort of shipping company. And she kind of got fed up with some aspects of elven culture, being a little different than regular elves, getting along more with the elves that live on sort of the lower tiers of the pyramid, if you will. She was like, you know what? I'm going to go and discover what's inside of me, because I don't understand this arcane stuff that's flowing in my veins. She ends up in the sort of country of Sectus, not in the kingdom, but in the country, and happens across a witch who tells her, hey, I can show you what's inside you. And she doesn't realize that the witch is kind of coaxing her to complete the tasks that she never had an opportunity to complete. And so Althea is thrusted into the world with goals from someone else, with her own as well. She has some issues with family. But ultimately, our friends meet together by happenstance in a bar, and there's a bar fight. It is a fight club, if you will, and so there's gambling and stuff like that. And from there, they show some offensive prowess, which one of our guild, high-ranking guild members take notice of, give them a task, which turns into something that's a little more political than they realized. And now they are sort of refugees of, or not refugees, that is not the term I want to use. They're more like political terrorists right now. And I think they don't like me for that. I think they don't like me. I think my players don't like me for turning this into like a political terrorism thing where they're the heroes. I believe that the players work really well together because they attempt to be friends outside of the show. It's really, really helpful to when you bond with someone to be able to experience a story together, right? The best way to bring players to the table is when they have a relationship with each other, even sometimes if it's tumultuous, because now it's an opportunity for you to work those troubles out. I think that a lot of them actually didn't know each other too well. They knew of each other, they've seen each other in the past, but we spent a good amount of time kind of bonding, and we're still doing little bonding activities here and there. They speak similar languages due to Dungeons and Dragons. Just even being interested in D&D kind of gets your brain in that fantasy realm, and you start taking in that data that is the fantasy world data, whether it be through like Japanese RPGs or through reading old school Salvatore books, or whether it just be playing Dungeons and Dragons. There's a schema that you learn. There's a language that you learn, and everyone sort of gets on board with it. And I know Andrew and Paola knew each other really well. I knew that Jordan and Paola were friends from the Sketchy Bugs, so I knew that they would work really well. And I basically knew I knew everybody from the Comic Bug in Manhattan Beach, and it sort of just kind of blended together because they sort of all sort of knew each other. Yeah.
So my character in Vicious Mockery, she's Althaea CELEB'LOKI. Very high chance I'm pronouncing that wrong. I don't have a grasp on Elvish at all. She is an Eladrin Sorceress, and she grew up in the Elven Kingdom in this world. Her parents are traveling merchants, so she traveled with them. She's very tan for an elf. Both of her parents are as well. Mark very geniusly came up with the idea that it's because of their traveling. It was just always something that existed. When she was an infant, her grandmother bathed her in draconic blood, which imbued her with this power that she has, but that also deformed her with the outline of scales all over her body. So she was always an outcast where she lived, because the elves, they put an emphasis on beauty and perfection, and to them she was not that at all. So she never got along with people. So she's not well socialized. She has a hot temper, and because of that hot temper, she actually got in an argument with her parents when she was 40 and left home because of that. And that's when she she stumbled upon a witch in a swamp who is this large half-orc woman, and she said, yeah, I'll teach you sorcery. But with that, she got to teach a little bit of respect and discipline. And after 50 years of that, the orc woman sent her out into the world to adventure, and then she came across what became known as the Pickle Posse.
So Delron's backstory is sort of, it kind of went with the regular D&D trope of everyone's an orphan. It's also like the fantasy. I don't know if you've ever seen like fantasy stories and stuff. It's like the hero has no parents, or they died a terrible death, or something like that. So I was just like, no one else did that when we were making characters. So I was like, I'm gonna do it. So he's an orphan. His parents didn't die a terrible death, or maybe they did. I don't know. That depends on Mark. But his backstory is that he was found on the street as a baby. And he was picked up and he was given to an orphanage, which is Dias Light. So if you guys have seen the show, Dias Light Orphanage has shown up a couple times, or a few times. It's the orphanage where he grew up. And he was given the name Delron because the old headmaster at the orphanage had just died when he was found. So they gave him the name as kind of like a tribute or something for the old headmaster. And that's how he got the name Delron. He has no last name because he doesn't know what his family is. So he doesn't have a last name. So he's just Delron. And he grew up in the orphanage. In the story, I think by now you guys have seen that there's a little gnome character called Mythal, who is his little friend. He's like his best friend, who he's a wizard. The backstory with that is that Delron helped him. Mythal wanted to be a wizard. He wanted to get into the arcane stuff, but the orphanage is a very religious place, and they wanted him to go into cleric or something religious. And if you guys have met Delron in the show, he's very combative, and he's very he protects people. He thinks everyone should be free to do whatever they want. So he saw that Mythal was getting kind of bullied into this, so he stepped up and kind of in a very violent way, which I'm not gonna talk about necessarily what that violent way was. That will come up in the game at some point, I guess. But in a very violent way, he pretty much just threatened someone and somehow managed to get Mythal to go pursue his arcane stuff. And they didn't force him to do anything else. And then Delron instead got reprimanded and sent to a monastery to train. Really, they just sent him there because he was a problem. He was too violent. And so in this monastery, this religious monastery, they taught him how to use weapons, kind of how to channel his anger, I guess you would say, anger, violence, or whatever. So he learned how to fight, weapons, patience, and self-control and all that. He didn't do very well with that either, so they kicked him out of there. And when they kicked him out, he was already an adult. So after that, he's just kind of did his own thing, mercenary work. Or when we first met him in the first episode, he was fighting in a bar for money and things like that. So that's his backstory. He's kind of the guy or the kid who kind of had nothing and kind of tried to fight his way into something, which ended up just him getting kicked out of pretty much everything he's been in. But he doesn't really care. He forges his own path, I guess you could say. His agenda, when the game started, his only agenda was money. Not necessarily because he wants to be rich or anything. I think I've already shown several times in the show that he doesn't keep money very long. He spends it. Either he gives it to the orphanage or people who need it, or just to buy things for his friends or for himself. He doesn't keep money, doesn't really care for it other than for usefulness. But he was just interested in making money and just hanging out with his friend Aoide and all that. And then it all became a mess. And then they got involved with some people, and so now his agenda is that he's kind of just in it. But the one thing, Delron, he's very religious still, from both the monastery and from the orphanage. And he sees that there's corruption within the ranks of paladins and stuff like that. The religious sect or section or whatever, the religious guild of that world. And he takes that very seriously. He does not like heretics or hypocrites or people who use Daya's name wrongfully. So he's out for blood at this point. His agenda is the guy who betrayed them or played them, Creekend. He's gonna die because you don't just trick Delron like that. And then all these paladins and clerics who are saying they're supporters of Daya and stuff, but they're out here killing innocents and stuff. They're gonna die too, because that's how Delron sees justice. He's very black and white when it comes to that, which is probably a character flaw, but we'll see how that goes. That's his motive at the moment.
So my Vicious Mockery character is, I play Aoide. She is a bard tiefling. The backstory that I have for her, she comes from the main city that we all kind of met up. She is a scoundrel. She's lived on the streets, mostly because there's no one else like her. When you see big horns, you think devils, and we're not going to touch them. You're either cursed or some unique creature that we don't want to mess with. In doing so, she's kind of attached herself to being, playing her bard part, kind of being mischievous, but doing it for a cause. The cause being the orphanage that she kind of rooted herself in. And through that same orphanage is how she met our monk friend, Delron. And so with him, they kind of just worked the streets, helped provide from it. And it wasn't until meeting the rest of the group that she pulled more of what she wanted to do into the landscape, and that was trying to be part of a guild. Originally, it was to get her to be part of the Rogues Guild, the Foxes, and slowly her trust. She didn't have trust in them anyways, but she's kind of lost trust as the story is going on because she knows they've been doing these really shady things that have been affecting the aspect of the story.
My character is Eladrin Greensmoke. He's considered the bad boy of the Dungeons and Dragons community, but you already knew that. He is a cynical quasi-ex-paladin, sort of fighter character. He's considered the John Mcclane of our fantasy world, a reluctant detective in a sense. He started out as, in his local militia after some events that occurred, sent him on an unusual path that I can't give too much away because we'll have to see how that develops, and we don't really know how it's going to develop. But he is, I try to kind of bring in a sort of everyman character that you would see in, all kinds of fiction. And as he's kind of got an obsession with justice, that sort of gives him, that's kind of his agenda is seeking justice. I like to play with I like to incorporate, your standard fantasy tropes into a fantasy world, and all the ones that I've kind of grown up with, all the ones that I've enjoyed, and the characters and that I've seen in movies and books and stuff like that, and try to bring that kind of character, and then sort of see where the situation kind of brings him. So he's not necessarily agenda-driven as much as he's kind of got his own set of rules, personal rules, and following those rules sort of takes him on adventure.
So we're the Pickle Posse because there is a little gnome woman who's very sweet, and her name is Pickle. And she owns a bar in the slums of the first town that the group arrives in. And she has a special drink. And unbeknownst to her, she invented what is pickle juice. And so she just called it Pickles Juice. And we all fought together in her bar, and we just became known, probably because of Delron, as Pickles Posse. The colors was just for ease of use, ease of identifying ourselves. Luckily, Althea, her figurine was already purple, and we all got to choose our own color, and it all worked out very well. But it also really reflects people's personality. I mean, Aoide's skin is blue, but she's that very quirky, unique kind of blue. Althea, I mean, her race is technically seen as like a royal race. And purple is very royal. Her eyes are purple. The stone that she uses to hone her arcane magic through is purple. Green is evergreen, is Delron, and is everlasting. And then the bright personality of Eladrin. It just all worked out perfect.
Well, you should like and subscribe Vicious Mockery if you enjoy good, fun personalities, if you want an ever-evolving story, If you want a story that takes place in a high fantasy realm with a modern take on our issues as a society, you should watch every video, and then you're going to want to go back and rewatch some, because there is so much data impacting some of the subtleties and the nuances. You're not going to pick it all up on the first go, and because I, as the writer, I have to rewatch some of my episodes because I can't always see all their facial expressions. So I know you as an audience, I'm an audience member too. We're going to watch it together, and it's going to be an awesome, evolving story that even the audience can participate with. Feel free to subscribe, comment. Tell us what you want to see. Tell us what you liked. And we will make sure that we evolve and change for the better. So expect much more fun stuff from Vicious Mockery in the near future. We're going to be going to deserted islands. We're going to be going to new, awesome, tropical venues. There's going to be sea life battles. There's going to be journeys of survival that our friends might not make it through. And all of these things are in my noggin, and I hope to share it with you.